Washington has found its third and final quarterback.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, Lars, we had just finished publishing last night's episode, just Thursday's episode on Wednesday night, and we saw that Shea Kuykendall, the quarterback from Northern Colorado, committed to Washington, which didn't come as a surprise to us once we talked about him on yesterday's show, as David Hayers talked about him visiting and a little bit about what that impact might look like. But now that he's officially on the roster, this is really good news for a number of reasons. And the first one being his depth and experience that he brings to the team.
Yeah, this was, as we talked about over the past few weeks on the show, Washington had to get another quarterback. It didn't really matter if it was a junior college quarterback. It didn't matter. There was two caveats. One, they had to have at least one full season of college football experience in terms of being on a roster, ideally playing in some games, but having a bridge between a senior or fifth-year senior in Will Rogers and an absolute true freshman in Demond Williams. There had to be an experience gap coverage between the two, which is exactly what Shea Kuykendall does. He started 3 games last year after Jacob Sermon started the first 9 games for Northern Colorado, 8 or 9 games for Northern Colorado, and the team ended up going winless last season. The throwback to the 2008 season, it was, I think, right, for Washington.
Yep, 2008.
Yeah. I'm sorry to bring up that bad memory, but we've all been there at some point. So I think the other thing to consider with that is he did pretty well in comparison to Sermon in those 3 games. And when you looked at what he was able to do, he had 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but he completed over 64% of his passes. And when you look at what does that backup need to do, well, he needs to be at least somewhat effective. You're not just bringing in a warm body to bring in a warm body who has like 3 or 4 years of experience, because as we talked about, if Will Rogers unfortunately does have to come out even just for a play, and Demond either is or isn't capable of going, you need to have another option as your emergency quarterback, whether he's listed as the second or, no pun intended, third quarterback on the roster when the depth chart comes out in late August. When I say that, it's going to be Demond Williams or Shea Kuykendall as that number 2 quarterback. For clarification.
The dreaded or of college football.
The lovely or the one that really drives all the attention, because that's where the stories come from. It's not the actual starters, it's who's not guaranteed a starting spot, which is also what Kuykendall is coming in to do, because you don't need somebody to compete with Will Rogers necessarily, but you want somebody who can push him, who can test him a little bit, but keep that seat not warm, but kind of just the temperature gauge on 2, knowing he can still come in and play. But the key with this also is having a quarterback in spring 2025, when Demond Williams and Dash Beerley, the 2025 commit, are on the roster. You need to have a
Tristan Keeney McMillan as well.
But I don't know if he's enrolling in January or if he's enrolling in June.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah.
For next spring camp, you don't want to get back in the situation of having 2 quarterbacks on the roster again. How do you avoid that? You have somebody who will then be a redshirt junior, working with a redshirt freshman or potentially sophomore, depending on how many games Demond Williams gets this season, with a true freshman and Dash Beerley. Now you have a staggered progression. No matter who ends up starting, you at least have some depth and progress in the room.
And that's one of the other things about this, where, you could go get, a junior or senior to help just bridge the gap and further just help Demond come along, which is one thing. And that's helpful in its own right. But that's not necessarily what you need, where all of a sudden, you're constantly looking in the portal for quarterbacks, which is not what Jedd Fisch wants to do. And he's told us that. He's been flat out and saying, I want to make sure that this roster is developed from the high school ranks, where that's what I believe the number he gave us was 80 to 85% of just the players on the roster. He wants those to come from high school recruiting, which is good. I like that plan. I think it's probably a little bit more sustainable than just going purely off the transfer portal, which is what, Kalen DeBoer is just method was going to be for the 2024 season, was just patching everything with transfer portal holes. And, maybe that's a sustainable thing for 1 year or 2 seasons, but it doesn't look like, especially with just some of the players we saw enter the portal this past spring, doesn't look like it's going to be the most overly effective way to build a roster. So getting somebody who had some experience at a lower level in Shea Kuykendall and a couple starts under his belt, that's exactly what you and I were talking about on this show when we said, or after DeMarcius Davis left for UCLA, and when we said, they need another quarterback, is somebody like this, where it's a couple of games of experience at a lower level, or it's somebody who certainly also needs some development in his own right. I don't mean that as a slight to him, because, everybody can always improve, but it's something where the more you look at it, the more you can just say, all right, this is a guy who, if we really need to turn to him in a pinch over Demond Williams 2024, we feel a little bit more comfortable than that instead of a walk-on. And then on top of that, you watch both these guys progress. And then after Will Rogers leaves, as you said, Lars, with Dash Beerley coming in January, with all of those guys, you can just kind of have, I think you and I have both said that Demond is not, I think, I know we've done this. We both said that Demond Williams is going to be the starter next season. But at the very least, this is a guy who can come in and push him and say, I have the experience. And if I've shown I can, improve in whatever areas the coaching staff wants me to do so in, then that's just going to do nothing but help me out as well, and helps out the roster, and it helps out everybody around him, where, all of a sudden, instead of the second or third team having to work with a walk-on quarterback, now all of a sudden there's a guy with a little bit more experience in there who, was able to earn a scholarship offer. And I mean, that is no slight to anybody else, but it's just that added experience and that added talent that is so much needed, especially in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider as you, because I don't disagree with anything you just said, but one thing to consider with that, as you were saying, that they didn't also go out and get, this is not a like for like example, but a Jaden Rashada type, somebody who is a former highly touted recruit that will sit behind a veteran this season and then compete next season. This clearly says, to our point, they like what Demond Williams showed in spring. They knew what he was going to be able to do coming out of Bastrop. That's why they worked so hard to get him early on in the process, was because they knew he was a perfect fit for the system. So you don't want to go get a quarterback that's going to seem like you're threatening Demond in terms of, and not that Demond would be bothered by that, because we know, seeing it work in camp, he wouldn't be bothered if a Jacob Eason type came in, right, where there's somebody else who, oh, wow, this guy might actually beat him out. Now you're not going to start for another 2 years, or maybe you transfer. No, Demond Williams clearly is that type of player that they want to build around, but you're still doing disservice if you don't bring in somebody who can at least challenge him. And that's why this is a perfect blending of previous talent, where he goes to was it Big Sky? Is that Northern Colorado, or is that
Mountain West?
Mountain West, that's right. I was thinking of some other school. But still, being at that FBS level, you can have somebody progress up to those ranks, because we've seen a number of guys go from the Power 5 or now Power 4 level to the Mountain West and blow up, and vice versa. So it's not a damning indicator that he wasn't already a Power 4 quarterback, because when you look at what he did at Long Beach Poly, he had a lot of success at Long Beach Poly. And so it was over 7,000 yards, over 60 touchdowns. I believe it was like 74 or something like that, but it was plus 60. And when you think about the talent that's in that league and the defenders that are in that league, that's not an easy accomplishment. So he's clearly got talent. Maybe he didn't necessarily have the right coaching when he was at Northern Colorado, which again would just kind of speak to his situation. So he comes in, learns from Jimmy Doherty, learns from Jedd Fisch, works under Will Rogers, and is able to learn from Will Rogers. And I think that's the other thing, is we saw this spring Demond and Will communicating a lot. Now, didn't really have much of a choice, and they weren't shunning Marcius Davis, but you could really see Demond leaning on Will and trying to pick his brain after every throw, and vice versa. Will would come over to Demond and say, what did you could see those little hand motions. Like, hey, what did you see there? What are we thinking about? Right. And that's exactly what you want in the quarterback room, iron sharpening iron, the guys building off of each other, knowing that Demond is going to be the long-term option.
Lars, with that being said, there's some position groups on this team that are a little underrated after spring practice. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big winner of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And I'm going to throw a little bit of a sleeper pick at the Everdays here. If you go check out the odds on FanDuel.com, or just wherever you use the FanDuel app, you're going to see Jason Tatum as a heavy favorite to win Eastern Conference Finals MVP. And we've talked about the Celtics a lot on this program, them moving on to the finals. But if you want a real nice, sleeper in the odds and everything for Eastern Conference Final MVP, Jaylen Brown has been great, but give me Drew Holiday. I think Drew Holiday might be a real nice pick there. And shout out to his brother, Washington legend Justin Holiday, too. So, Lars, we got a fantastic question in our mailbag that we did earlier this week about underrated position groups on Washington's roster. And we wanted to expand on our answers a little bit because we gave it some nice time on the mailbag episode, but there's still more that we wanted to say. So I had the edge rushers. I believe you had the running backs. Let's dive into that a little bit. I'm gonna give you the floor here.
Yeah, this is something where when we talk about what the offense needs to do, obviously everything goes through the quarterbacks. Everything starts with the offensive line. But we saw last season when you need your other position group, being the running backs, to step up, we saw Dillon Johnson do that. That's why you go and add a Jonah Coleman. Now, part of that is when Jedd Fisch takes the job at Arizona, from Arizona, and comes up to Washington and takes his entire offensive coaching staff with him, you'd be pretty surprised if one of his star players doesn't come with him. And although they didn't get Noah Fafita and Jerome McMillan, they did get Jonah Coleman. And we saw this spring, I don't think anybody wants to tackle him on this team. I'm sure there's a couple of guys that might say, hey, you know what, I would love the challenge, and I think I could do it. But the man is Michael Turner, and he also molds himself in the Danny Johnson's image as well, which to me, I love that throwback. This I remember LT back with that blacked out visor and everything with the Chargers. Oh, those are glorious days of my childhood. But the other thing why I think it's a underrated position is because we know what Jonah Coleman is. We saw what he could do in Arizona. But it's Cameron Davis coming back after having a 10-touchdown season, being really effective a couple years ago, missed 2023 season due to an injury that he suffered in fall camp, so wasn't able even just to get going, and kind of were robbed of seeing what that 1-2 punch of Dillon Johnson and Cam Davis can look like, because we saw what it could do in 2022 with Wayne Talapapa and Cam Davis. This one, I'm going to give you full credit for this. It's a souped up version of that 2022 running back room with Wayne Talapapa and Cam Davis. When you look at and this is I love Wayne Talapapa, and I know you do too. Ryan Grubb said it best when he said, I don't know if that guy is going to have a future in football, 10, 12 years, whatever, but whatever he does, Wayne Talapapa is going to be great at whatever he does, because he's just such a good person, and also was great at running the ball. I mean, got the first touchdown against Texas, in the Alamo Bowl. Yep. Since they beat Texas twice, I had to clarify that one. But when you look at what those two could do, and then you look at who's even behind them with Adam Mohammed, who's a true freshman, Jordan Washington, who's a true freshman. We saw Sam Davis work out this spring on some level. We saw him get it. Or Sam Adams. Yeah, what did I say? Sam Davis?
Yeah. Combining two guys. Hey.
Right. But I was going to say, because if Sam Adams could become even any half, and this is no disrespect to Sam, but in terms of he hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout most of his UW career, if he can stay healthy in 2024 and even just provide half of the production that Cam Davis does, or even a quarter of the production that Cam Davis does, with those other two true freshman running backs, that's a really dangerous room. And on top of all of that, you can't forget about Daniel Ngata, who's the one guy in this room that I think actually could, when we saw those swing passes. I know Jonah Coleman looked pretty good in them, but that route just screams Daniel Ngata, and the versatility that Jedd Fisch's offense is going to have this fall. I think there's a fair chance that Daniel Ngata is going to surprise some people this fall. And so that to me was where that idea came from, was Daniel Ngata going to surprise people. The freshmen are going to get some time and surprise people and show them what they can do in the future. And then Cam Davis is going to remind people, hey, by the way, I'm still here. Jonah Coleman's great, but I'm also still here and just as productive.
So first thing that came to my mind throughout all of that was when you talked about those swing passes. I agree. I think Daniel Ngata would be a real nice on some of those, but Jordan Washington, man, watching just his speed and just how quickly he gets into that top gear. I cannot wait to see him in the open field. That's just going to be absolutely wild to watch. But I like everything you were saying there, but I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I want to move to the defensive side because you and I were having a discussion about something you wrote over on Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies about Washington's defensive depth chart and who the starters are going to be. And one thing we kind of came to agreement on is that Zach Durfee is going to start at one edge. We know that. We love Zach. We think he's primed for a really big year. But we kind of talked about the other position. And I've said a lot about Deshawn Lynch, both here and on Huskies Wire. And I want to kind of take it a step further here today because I think that he has a legitimate opportunity to start. And I think that one of the things he's going to be best at is moving inside as a pass rusher on third downs and just utilizing his length, his athleticism, some of those things against interior linemen. But I also think that he might have a bigger role than some people think as an edge setter, where he didn't really do a whole ton of it over his time at Sac State, but he's somebody that, because he played as a stand-up edge a lot, but he's got the strength, he's got the length, he's got the power. He can do all the things that are needed from an edge setter, kind of like what we saw from Jeremiah Martin a couple of years ago. And I think that that's something where he can be utilized in that role really well. And I'm just really intrigued to see how he's going to progress because he's somebody who, with this coaching staff, I think does have a really high ceiling. And just with the way this defensive line has played out and with, everything that we know about Steve Belichick's scheme, how he likes to use his defensive linemen, and just all the different things that they're asked to do, I think that he's one guy in particular that's going to be put in really advantageous situations that he can take advantage of week in and week out. And I really like that mold, but I want to switch to just some of the pass rushers for a second because I look up and down this depth chart of pass rushers, and we've gotten a lot of comments in every day saying the defensive line needs help. And sure, you would certainly like to see some more experience on the defensive line, especially along the interior. But when I look at this group of edge rushers, I see a group, and I hate using this term. I do, because it's such a cliche. Shout out to our good buddy and editor, Dan Rayleigh. But it oozes talent, man. I look up and down this list, and all these guys are so talented. Like with the most recent transfer in Jaden Wayne, you look at Jacob Lane, who was really good in spots as a freshman, at Isaiah Ward, at Russell Davis, at Lance Holtzclaw, at Maurice Heims, at Voight Nufi. These guys all are super, super talented. And I love watching each and every one of them play. And, the body types are all, it's shockingly similar for the majority of them. They love these big, long, somewhat skinny edge rushers that can still play with a decent amount of power. But if you can put those guys in the right scheme, and from what I've watched for my entire life with this New England Patriots defense, is that it's very possible to scheme up edge rushers and put them in advantageous situations, that some of these guys are going to develop this year between that scheme and what we saw Jason Kafusi do with some of the defensive linemen who's able to develop down at Arizona, that this could end up being a really, really surprising group. And I'm just really excited about it.
No, I'm with you 100% in terms of what the edge position could become. There's so much potential, right? That dangerous word that everybody's favorite and least favorite word is, right? Because I know, obviously, you mentioned Dan not being a fan of the oozing potential, the oozing talent thing.
Just any cliche as a whole.
Right, chip on your shoulder, all that sort of stuff. But the one thing that I look at this room and think is, yes, there's without question a lot of upside, a lot of potential, all those sort of things. The dark horse for me in that whole room is Maurice Heims. If he can end up becoming the player that the coaching staff and we think could become, then yes, this is a very dangerous room. And it doesn't necessarily, he's not like the linchpin of the room in terms of if he doesn't pop, oh, now we're in trouble. It just then becomes, okay, then does Lance Holtzclaw provide that, pass rush pressure? Does who's kind of the other one opposite of Durfee? Because again, we don't need to really detail too much of what Durfee can do because we know how good he can be.
Absolutely. But so one guy that I kind of want to talk about in that same vein for a couple of reasons is Jaden Wayne. where I think this is a really nice get. Like, obviously he wasn't overly productive at Miami, but it's his freshman year. You can't expect him to just come in and all of a sudden be a starter and do all those different things, where we knew he had some growing to do, especially after, flipping over to defensive side full time in his senior year of high school at IMG, where I really like Jedd Fisch. I want to make sure that's very clear. He is a really talented athlete and has a very high ceiling. But I think that throughout the 2024 season, if this coaching staff can show that they can develop Jedd Fisch at a very high level, that could be a really, really nice selling point for recruiting down the line, where not only with the local guys as, him being a product of Tacoma, but as somebody who, hey, yeah, this is a guy who's a top 100 recruit, decided to transfer home after 1 year at Miami, and we were able to turn him into a really, really productive edge rusher. Even if it's, just in spurts, if he has the season that Isaiah Ward does last year at Arizona, where it's 4.5, 5 sacks, something like that, that's a fantastic year for him. And that's just that next step in his progression where all of a sudden 2025, you can move him into a much bigger role. And I think that's really exciting and can be such a huge selling point where, when we talk about some of the edge rushers, which we'll get to in the next segment, like CJ May, like Hayden Lowe, some of these guys in the 2025 class that they're recruiting, all of a sudden you say, hey, here's a top 100 guy that we turned into a really productive player. Yeah, that's certainly the whole goal of having top 100 players, is that they're supposed to become these guys, but that doesn't always happen. And we're showing you with this coaching staff saying, hey, here's another product of just our coaching staff and what we're able to do. You should be next. And Lars, with that being said, let's get into some of those 2025 guys. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time, because with killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, which, hey, as I wear the Sonic shirt here, I wish for nothing more than be able to go watch a Sonics playoff game. And still, fingers crossed, as we say every episode, we're fingers crossed we're going to be able to do that soon, because that would just be so awesome. And with last minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. With zone deals, save even more when you choose a section, like Game Time chooses seats. All these amazing things like seat views where you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Those are all some of the awesome things that make Game Time so great. And you can take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Lars, it's going to be a very busy week for us. And I mean that in the sense of we're going to get to this a whole lot more next week for all the everydayers out there. This is an absolutely massive week on the recruiting trail, where the number is up to 17, I believe, guys that are going to be coming in, 7 or 8 blue chip recruits, couple commits, and Jake Flores and Dash Beerley is supposed to be coming in as well. But this is the first huge opportunity where getting a couple guys up for the spring game was really nice, but that was early enough where, getting a commit from Chesson Keeney and McMillan that weekend was good. And, obviously you want to close on Douglas Utu, on Chantel Lele, on some of those other guys. But when we look at this upcoming weekend, Dijon Lee, we know, is the headliner. Andrew Marsh is coming. Madden Faraimo is coming. Just some of the names that are going to be on campus this weekend. Maybe they don't close them this weekend, but making sure you leave that strong impression and getting a couple commits is going to be so, so important.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing to take away from this weekend is when you look at who they're bringing in, for example, 3 receivers. You're not expecting with Raiden Weinsbreit already committed. You're not necessarily thinking of taking all 3 of them. But the point is,
I'd take all 3 of them if they wanted to commit, man. If all 3 of those dudes said, "Hey, we're jumping in," I'm taking 4 receivers in a heartbeat.
I'm 100% with you on that. I'm just saying, but the reason you get all these guys on campus at the same time is great players want to play with great players, and that's not any comment about other rosters or either current roster. But when you get that talent around each other, you look how the SEC teams build their teams up. Big Ten, you look at Ohio State, Michigan. You get all that top talent together, and just say, you know what? Why not all play together here? You could set records at this school, or you could chase championships and team success here. And I think that's kind of what it seems like Jedd Fisch is doing with these big recruiting weekends is there's two ways to go about it. You can either bring a handful of guys in and really spend a lot of time with them, or you can bring in a bunch of guys and really just let that collection of talent decide for themselves what they want to do. And when you put the coaching staffs around them, like you're going to look at Steve Belichick, you're going to look at John Richardson, you're going to look at Brendan Carroll, you're going to look at all these guys and think, yeah, these guys have a pretty deep assortment of talent and experience in the game of football. Now, other schools do as well, but that selling the NFL, seeing that success this past April, if you're Andrew Marsh, you can go to Washington and be a top 10 pick. There's no question about that. And now, will it be different under Jedd Fisch and how the offenses look and all that sort of stuff? Sure. But the perception of, oh, you're going to go all the way out to Seattle. No one's going to see you. You're going to be on what network? Oh, we're in the Big Ten. Oh, we got, NFL coaches left and right. Those issues that used to be harder for Washington to recruit against now don't exist. And Jedd Fisch is not only taking a blowtorch to him, he's saying, no, we're not even going to acknowledge that. We're going to get all the best talent that we can. And as we mentioned on the show, in order to get the best recruiting class in school history, you have to get the best recruits in the country on campus to commit to the school.
Yeah. And that's something we haven't just seen at Washington for a while, where the recruiting strategy is great. We like what they're doing on that front, but it's time to close. It's time to make sure that you can turn these guys into commits, where I know there are people that were disappointed with the way the transfer portal was handled. I know there are people that saying, oh, you needed more of this, you needed more of that. But this kind of always seemed like the plan where you get some of these stopgap guys where, yeah, of course you want some bigger names, you want whatever. But it just kind of seems like everything has been building up to this moment that starts this weekend and is going to run through the end of June when there's the second big visit weekend on the 21st. And I just look around this weekend and I see so many guys at this coaching staff where I've written about this a little bit over on Huskies Wire, where I get really tired of using the term top target over and over and over again. But I also just can't find another one that fits. When you look at, a guy like Christian Thatcher, where I don't know if he's priority one on the target list with Zadrius Randy Sale just being who he is, but I think Christian Thatcher is a very, 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 very close second. I like his speed. I like a lot of things that he does on film. And he's somebody who you and I both talked to, Lars, and the more I've gotten to know him, and the more it just seems like, yeah, this guy is really sold on what Jedd Fisch's coaching staff is doing. And if he ends up being one of Washington's commits over the next couple of weeks, I can't say that's something I'd be surprised by, because he told me, he said, I almost committed to them when they were in Arizona because I just love what they're doing and love what they're building and love everything about that staff. And that's certainly something that can rub off on a lot more of these guys. You mentioned receivers and, maybe Andrew Marsh. We'll see what happens with that. But all of a sudden you look at a guy like Chris Lawson or Phillip Bell. You look at tight end. You look at Caleb Edwards, who's sitting just outside the top 100. You look at, not he's a 3-star lineman, but somebody who's gotten a lot of big time offers, had some big visits lined up, is John Mills. That's another guy who's super important. You look at a local guy, another offensive lineman, in Demetri Manning. There are so many guys that are going to be on campus that we're going to really, really dive into over the course of the next week. And it's really important to try to get some of those guys committed as quickly as you possibly can so you can help build out the rest of the class. And that's one of the reasons it's really great that two of Washington's 5 commits in the class are going to be on campus this coming weekend. And that's Dash Beerley and Jake Flores. Both those guys jumped in the boat really early. Jake Flores came up for an unofficial and just said, yeah, no, I love it here. I'm going to commit. Dash followed the coaching staff from Arizona. And it's worked out well for those guys so far. And if those guys want to just, keep the ball rolling, this is a really important time to make sure that happens.
And think about who better to bring up with 3 receivers in your top targets at the position, and who he's going to potentially throw to over the next 4 or 5 years. And now, again, could all 3 of those guys end up catching passes from Damon Williams for 2 years? Probably. They probably will if they end up coming to Washington. Sure. But, to the call back to the first segment. But with that being said, still having those relationships and connections, and first of all, being around, I don't think you've gotten the chance to meet Dash, but I know you've gotten the chance to talk to him a lot. I got to see him at the Under Armour camp. He's such a likable guy, and I think he's a guy where when you bring him in that locker room, he's a guy that could eat. I remember I asked him if he had the list of recruits that Jimmy Doherty and Jedd Fisch and Brady Carroll and all the staff wanted him to recruit in the 2025 class. Like I'm getting that list through from Jimmy. I think he might have just gotten that list this weekend. Like in terms of the guys coming on this visit. Hey, John Mills, you want to block for Dash Beerley? And by meet Damon Williams. Yeah, I know he's going to be hard to block because he's running around a lot. But would you like to block for Damon? That sort of thing. That's why you all these guys around them. And the important thing that I want to close on this, you're getting them in the off season when these kids can spend as much time with them and as much time with the coaches. It's a relaxed setting and you're around a bunch of other talent. When you bring kids in during a season for an official visit, it goes one of two ways in terms of, wow, I was at this Oregon upset. There's win over Oregon. It's a massive historical win, but I didn't necessarily get a ton of time with the coaches. Like it was a great experience and I loved it, but I didn't get to build those connections. And doing that in the off season like this is a perfect setting to do that.
So I'm going to close on this then, where a lot of these guys were around for that. We know Dijon Lee was on campus for that. Yeah. We know that some of these commits were there for that game. And I mean, it's a credit to Kalen DeBoer for getting them up there on an unofficial visit, but that all helps get the ball rolling to this point where, yeah, you want to make sure these official visits happen in the summertime because it's way easier to do all the things that you just said, Lars. But just seeing that and seeing Washington on such a big stage could be really beneficial. And it's just, as we said, over the next week, we're going to really dive into all of the aspects of this. And it's time to close on these guys. It's time to just, all right. Like I remember a couple of years ago when it was Anthony James in the class, where all of a sudden, he commits right away. And that got the ball rolling, where we saw that with Jason Robinson this last year as well, where all these guys who committed right away and just got the ball rolling, which was one of the benefits of these really big weekends. And hey, we just got to see what happens, right? And Lars, with that being said, thank you as always for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the off season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel, do content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. You have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop them right down below in the comments. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Monday.